but I'm definitely more on the data side than the design side. I'm not a designer. I'm a scientist, a computational scientist. But when it came time for me to leave the warm blanket of academia and university and take my steps into the cold, hard, real world, I wanted to bring with me some sense of doing some work with some social benefit. I wanted to keep some aspect of my life directed in this direction. So I saw that in Basel, maybe there was an opportunity to bring people together that have some experience with data analysis, data science within Basel, to address this issue of social benefit. So I founded this Meetup group, Data Science for Good, and the goal is to collect people that have touched data in some way and have them donate their time and energy towards projects with some social benefit. This has been slightly surprisingly popular, surprising to me in any way. So we have something less than 300 members. Of course, many of these are there to watch what's going on, keep track of what's going on rather than being actively involved. But we try to meet around once a month. We have one active project currently, which I'll tell you a little bit about tonight. But because we're a data science group, of course, we have to practice what we preach. We have to collect data about ourselves. So we had a recent membership poll to get an idea of what are we interested in, what can we do, what should we do. Our interests, as you might not be surprised to hear from being in Basel with Novartis and Roche, skew very much in the direction of health, environment, but also many other topics, wide range of topics. And in terms of skills, we skew very much mathematical, statistical, modeling analysis. Although we do have people with visualization background, we do have people with data collection, survey design background. What we're definitely missing is people with any sort of legal or regulatory background or experience. And we're also missing strong connections with non-government organizations, not-for-profit organizations, people who could define concrete projects for us to work on, people that need our skills. This is the challenge, the main challenge for the group at the moment. So nevertheless, we're willing to perform a wide range of services for any sorts of projects with any sort of social bent. So if something springs to mind, then please keep me in the loop. What works best for us are short-term, concrete packages of work that we can spend some months on and deliver a product on. That works best for us. But what I also wanted to talk to you about tonight is the one project we have active at the moment, which is looking at inequality in wealth and assets across Basel-Stadt. This is supported by data provision from the Staatsamt, the Stadt Basel. They have an open data project where they try to make as much data about Basel-Stadt open and accessible publicly as they can. They were very keen to have us work on some parts of their data because this was a pilot project. They needed to show that there was some client need for this data to be made available. So they were very, very helpful in providing the data to us. The goal was to visualize, explore, quantify inequality across Basel-Stadt, and ideally to look for relationships, drivers of that inequality. That was the original goal. The data comes from the yearly tax declarations that probably most of you have had to deliver. You probably have to start thinking about last year's tax declarations when you're coming up pretty soon. The data is grouped by Wohnviertel and then anonymized, of course. We have large chunks of aggregated data where it's not possible to identify individual declarations by any means. We have data about income and income tax, so Einkommen, and Vermögen, assets and asset tax. And this is, as I said, broken down by Wohnviertel across Basel-Stadt, which is what you see here on the map. The raw data looks like this. We have a table of populations for one Wohnviertel, in this case Altstadt, equal numbers of tax declarations, and the summed amount of income and income tax, as well as assets and asset tax associated with that population. And we have this for each of the 20-odd Wohnviertel in Basel-Stadt. So that's the raw data we have to work with. And the way we chose to examine inequality is using this inequality metric called Gini, which some of you are probably familiar with. It's a very standard metric for inequality of wealth distributed across the population. It's simply a number between 0 and 1, where 0 means everybody has exactly the same amount of wealth, and 1 means that one person has everything and everybody else has 0. So real numbers are somewhere in between 0 and 1 here. To give you an idea of what this looks like, what we see here on the graph is a distribution of wealth across the population. If you have all of the people lined up from poorest to richest, and then we plot on the y-axis how much money they have. So the poorest person has this amount of money, the richest person has this amount of money. This is a fairly even distribution, a fairly equitable distribution here. This corresponds to a Gini value of 0.08, so a very low value. And here, the richest people have only 1.6 times the amount of wealth as the poorest. So this is, as far as Gini is concerned, this is a very equitable distribution of wealth and assets. This is a more unequal distribution of assets, where the richest people up here have 20 times the wealth of the poorest people. And in this case, the Gini is moderate. It's about 0.44. So that gives you an idea of what the wealth distributions might look like and how this relates to this Gini metric. So now if we come to look at how is income distributed across the Wohnviertel, within the Wohnviertel in Basel-Stadt, we have this data here. So each of these blue dots corresponds to one single Wohnviertel, so Altstadt, Kleinhünigen, etc. This is the Gini value for each of these Wohnviertel. They're obviously ordered in most equal to most unequal distribution of income. This is only on income. And we have it related to World Bank numbers for Gini for various countries, which are more or less known for their equitable distributions of assets. We maybe could discuss this. So this gives you an idea of where the individual Wohnviertel in Basel-Stadt sit in relation to the rest of the world, right? Russian Federation is doing pretty well. We can also make a comparison between income and income tax. So here we want to ask the question, is taxation progressive for the Wohnviertel, right? So progressive, under this definition, would mean that the richer you are, then the higher rate of tax you pay, so the greater proportion of tax you pay. What we see here is that the income inequality is always lower than the taxation inequality. So this means that richer people always pay comparatively more tax than poorer people, and they do so at a higher rate than the amount of income they have. So it's progressive to the extent, taxation is progressive to the extent that rich people pay a higher share of taxation across Basel-Stadt. This is true for every Wohnviertel. But we can also compare income with assets. So this is what we see on this plot. Now the Wohnviertel are arranged in order of increasing assets. The orange dots are the amount of assets per capita, per tax declaration within each Wohnviertel. And the blue dots are the income per capita in each Wohnviertel. So what you see is that the distribution of assets across Basel-Stadt is highly unequal. Right? There are relatively many Wohnviertel where people have fairly low assets. This is millions of francs per declaration, millions of francs per tax declaration. And there are a couple of Wohnviertel up here where per tax declaration people have a large amount of assets. So where are these wonderful places to live?
Average.
On average. On average.
On average.
Yeah, on average. So here we have Bettingen and Bruderholz, the green leafy suburbs of Baselstadt. In Bettingen, the average person has 2.4 million francs of assets per capita. In Bruderholz, 2.5 million per capita. These are the top two Wohnviertel for assets. On the other end of town, figuratively speaking, and a little closer to home, we have Kleinhünigen and Kleibeck, where the average assets are 60 to 70,000 francs per capita. If we want to get a sense for how does this share look across population? So if we take an average person from Bruderholz and Bettingen each, then that's roughly equivalent to 17 people from each of the poorest Wohnviertel. And if we look at this in terms of individual households, then the top 1,000 households across Baselstadt collectively have about 12 billion francs of assets, and that's roughly equal to the bottom 100,000 households across Baselstadt. So, I don't want to, well, it's important to note that this inequality metric Gini doesn't directly translate to some quality of living measure. And it's certainly true that Baselstadt doesn't have problems with working poor to the extent that many other developed nations have. And I didn't find it terribly surprising that wealth and assets are unequally distributed across Baselstadt, but what I did find surprising was the scale of this inequality, the difference between the top and the bottom. I wasn't expecting to see that. Although maybe Baselstadt there's plenty of old money around Basel, so maybe I shouldn't be so surprised about that. So that's what I wanted to show to you guys tonight. It's a fairly exploratory look at the data, and we plan to write up a report on this and deliver it to the Staatsamt. And as I mentioned, where the group is continuing, we're looking for more concrete projects to sink our teeth into. You had a question?
It's very interesting. But you could also claim that the assets are, the space is more expensive in these regions only, and it's not something else. It's not how rich the people are in terms of, they have space or something. You don't have this. This price per square meter or something. You know what I mean?
Yes, and I'm sure that that's true. But
yeah, but of course, this doesn't change anything. But just this is not in the data now.
That's true, but I suspect what it reflects is that if you're living downtown, you're less likely to own anything at all. If you're renting in Bettingen, then you're not included in this asset.
Mm.
Do the richest parts, are they also the ones where there's the biggest inequality or not?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So that means in the rich parts there are also people who are poor who live there. Or poor, relatively.
Yes. Yeah. So this, I haven't shown the curve here, but if you look at the distribution of assets within individual Wohnviertel, it also looks very stark like this. So the top fifth of people within each Wohnviertel have the majority of assets in that Wohnviertel, and that's true also for the richest Wohnviertel. So the poor people in Bettingen are richer than elsewhere in Baselstadt, but they're much poorer than the rich people in Bettingen.
But there's not a big... Okay. So is there a relationship between the richer...
So as you said at the beginning, so the more the higher the average assets are per capita, also the higher the inequality is. It's not a direct, doesn't have to be that way, but that is how it works out. Diane, you had a question?
Yeah, I had two questions. The one was actually really this graph and the graph before. If there is a reason that there is no description or legend on the x-axis, okay, to know what is which line of these?
Visual simplicity.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're simply ordered in increasing.
But would it be kind of that one of them is Klan-Unigen, or is it?
Yeah.
The left most.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and the other one, okay, good. And in the other one before, here,
This one?
you had, in the middle, you have these two jumps.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What
That I
is-
haven't looked at in detail. Yeah. I can't tell you why the taxation inequality is slightly lower here than here. I can't answer.
It's interesting. Yeah, you shouldn't earn above that. You should stop
Right.
or jump to the one behind.
Right, right. Yeah.
Good to know for the next negotiation on the how do you say?
But tough.
So for these really rich folk, for that very high average assets, is the median very close to their average,
Median.
or are this bunch of very rich people?
I have the median from 2013 from Benevolent, and the median is 62,000.
Oh.
That's what. So as this gentleman asked before,
The-
it's very unequally distributed also within Bruderholz. So the richest. So that's why I included this household plot. So this now also separates the richest and poorest within each Wohnviertel, and so you can see that there's very few households at the top that have a huge majority of assets.
What are the intentions of the report? Growing up here, I'm not
Descriptive.
surprised by the numbers.
Yeah.
Data
Yeah.
science, now you did the data science, and what's now
Yeah.
the for good part? Do you just want to be recognized for the plots and then maybe you don't want
The
to not happen anything?
So the for good part is looking at some social question, some equality of income and assets across Basel, and then we need to publicize this in a way that has some impact. So simply making the plots doesn't really do anything. Even just giving the report to the Staatsamt doesn't do much. But I'm hoping that we can work with them, and Diane also offered to help out to try and publish this to some extent.
Question. I'm super curious. So you have 300 people in the group. How do you organize yourself, making anything happen and get to this level? With the people who is working on what? Is there a project management tool or?
So as the main organizer of the group, I can say very poorly. It's very, very ad hoc, and for the first half of the group's existence, we didn't have a concrete project to work on. It's difficult to keep people engaged and working on something without something concrete to work on. Generally, the meetups themselves have been fairly easy to handle because we haven't had a large number of people attending each individual meetup.
Yeah.
So then that's somehow manageable.
So the people come to the meetup, then you say, okay, what topics do we want to approach? Then you decide on the topic, and then you start coding or kind of researching and doing something.
Yeah, so to begin with, we had some general discussions. What should we look at? Once we had this project defined, we spent a couple of meetups just with a group that wanted to work on this project and help define it. And then it was sort of hackathon style that people would come and we'd do some coding together on analyzing the data, visualizing the data.
For a day, hacking a day?
No,
or?
for 4 hours, 3-4 hours.
Oh, and then again 3 weeks later, continue.
Yeah, more or less.
Okay. Yeah, that's probably a big challenge.
It's a challenge. It requires a large level of commitment and energy from the people that are working on the project because they have to do a lot of work offline.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's not easy. So one intention, vague intention at the moment, but solid intention, vague but solid. It's clear in my mind, but it's very vaguely realized in the real world. Is to turn this into a Verein, so a club, an organization, with the goal of then making it slightly more palatable for people to work with us, to attract clients, sponsorship, things like this. So we should have more of a concrete presence.
Mm-hmm. With regular meetings and
yeah.
Because I think there is a big potential in that idea, and also to find or define a working method, a process, how you select the people, have a workflow, how they work together until you have the result, what you do then, kind of to have this 10 steps, because I haven't seen that kind of organization before.
Yeah, so there are some other organizations such as one very big one called DataKind. Probably most of you have heard of this. And they seem to have a lot of experience going through this process. They work directly with NGOs. They help to define the task. They help to wrangle the data. They build a team of data scientists that have the experience to do that project. They seem to know how to do that very well.
And are you currently looking for ideas and data? So could people approach you?
Of course, absolutely.
Perhaps you said it at the beginning, but was the data first or this question? I mean, like you had this, obviously you had this data, but there are millions of data.
Of course. It was a little bit of both, but it was prompted to some extent by the person responsible at the Staatsamt for the Open Data project. He came to one of our meetups and said, "We have this data. This is a question that we think is interesting. Maybe we can look at this." The hardest thing is domain-specific knowledge. So providing any random data scientist with a huge chunk of data is very, very difficult for them to get into if they have no domain-specific knowledge. So having people with some experience or some links with a particular domain, a particular question, it makes things very efficient. Right, thank you very much, guys. It was very nice to come.